you've really built it not just from your own ideas, but from life in the British Navy. The structure of that, the challenges of that, how much has that fed in to the way that you now do structure your everyday?
Look, absolutely, and it's any military, it's the discipline as well. And look, I used to fly in helicopters. I did anti-submarine warfare. Then I did helicopter search and rescue. Like that's stressful shit when you're going
Yeah.
out and you can quite possibly die, right? And I also went through combat survival and resistance to interrogation training, which was the big thing for me. That I realized after that stuff that used to be stressful was no longer stressful. And that's when, and I already had a master's degree in exercise physiology before I joined. So I knew about exercise is good for you because it's a stressor and it actually stimulates adaptation. And that's when I started to realize actually maybe psychological stuff happens the same way. That
Mm.
if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Friedrich Nietzsche, that what does not kill us makes us stronger. If you got the brackets, as long as we recover effectively.
Yeah. And I know for a lot of people listening, having gone through the pandemic and the stresses that that will have given a lot of people in different ways, people are feeling exhausted, right?
Mm.
Mentally, even physically to some degree. People are just over it and trying to get back up into, a healthy, motivated type of life. How do you, or what would you say to that person to kind of deal with that core exhaustion, even burnout to a degree, that
Yeah.
really might be preventing some people for even wanting to, live a healthier life, push through some of these things?
Well, number one, you've got through it and it didn't kill you, right? And actually, our grandparents went to war. We had to stay at home, right? And yes, it was stressful, particularly if you've had kids and stuff like that. But it's like, okay, we're through it now. Rather than sitting and lamenting on it and talking about all the bad shit, let's look at this as an opportunity to move forward and a reset and say, okay, well, I'm now through the other side of it. I'm in control of my own destiny now. So I need to build in those structures around exercising first thing in the morning, even if it's only short, just to get a positive start for your day. And I talk a lot about your sage and gremlin, about creating your best self and actually doing the day with intentions.
Mm.
And diet is hugely important, and sleep. So it's what are all of those things that an athlete preparing for the Olympics, what would they do? And I need to do this, right? And because this is the biggest game of all, the game of life, right? And there's a lot of people, they've got kids and stuff like that. Your kids don't do what they tell you, what you tell them to do. They do what you do, right? So it's setting those examples for your kids, showing your kids how you deal with stress and those sorts of things is really, really important because it'll embed those behaviors. And then you start to see that it builds. So it starts to become an upward spiral rather than the downward spiral that a lot of us went into in COVID.
Mm.
Right. So that's done. Reset. That's what I would say.
And like you have said as well, this sort of shift, if people feel like they're going from literally zero to having to rebuild in their lives in all of these different ways, it starts with the small stuff. It starts with just putting on the exercise gear or just going for that 10-minute, 15-minute quick burst of exercise at the beginning of the day. Like you don't have to start like you're a full-time athlete. You can just begin small.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the biggest things for me is starting the day like Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, used to start the day by saying to himself, Marcus, Memento Mori. Remember that you are mortal, that you could die at any time. And he said, remember that, Marcus, not to be morose, but to remind yourself that life is a precious gift and that you should wake up every day with extreme gratitude just to be alive, right? And if you start the day like that, it's a game changer, an absolute game changer, because it then goes from, and if you really embed this into you and you start to encounter stress during that day, it's no longer, oh, I've got to deal with this bad shit. It's, I get to deal with this challenge because I'm alive. Like, what's the alternative, right? And so
Yeah.
that psychological framing is hugely, hugely important.
And on this podcast, we talk a lot about intention, the whole concept of being undistracted, living in line with the things that you
Mm.
find your purpose in, your passion in. And I feel like you bring a tool to the table that's really helpful in this, that your routine board, I think you call it, that literally is plastered on the wall, that gives you a structure to guide your days by.
Absolutely. I've got one right here. I can see it right there. I call it a ritual board, right?
Ritual
And so
board, yeah.
mine on it, I've got workout 5 times a week. I've got mobilizers. I've got doing a run. I've got meditation, sauna, doing my rehab, all of this stuff. And it's there and it's a visual thing and you tick it off. And whenever you tick stuff off, it releases dopamine, right? So natural rewards for the brain: food, water, sex, nurturing, achievement. Anytime you do any of those things, it releases a little bit of dopamine in the brain, and the dopamine says, that felt good, do it again. Here's the thing that I discovered when I created this ritual board years ago: motivation follows action, not the other way around. There's too many adults still believe in fairies, and they're waiting for the bloody motivation fairy to come along and give them a big dollop so they can then go and sort their shit out, right? Motivation follows action, not the other way around. So just get started. And the ritual board is key for that.
Yeah, and I think it is something that gives you a visual aid that lets you know you're on track, you're heading in the right direction. And I do love that you kind of give people a bit of a slap in the face in this book, saying that no one's coming, right? No one
Mm.
is going to make sure you're motivated. No one is going to make sure you're ticking off that box. It really has to come from your own desire, your own motivation to get this stuff done.
Absolutely. And again, I get back to this whole concept of um, life's not supposed to be comfortable. You know, you're not supposed to go through life without anybody offending you and these sorts of things. That's this Pollyanna thing that's not reality. Life is hard. It has been hard forever. So if you just wake up and go, you know what, life is hard, but I'm up for the challenge, and use that memento mori, I think that's hugely important. Like how we psychologically frame stuff is massive, absolutely massive. And linked into that from the psychology stuff, a lot of people get in their heads about, you know, they get into this overthinking or they're worried about stuff, right? And recent research shows that 94% of things that the average person worries about never actually comes true. 94%, right?
Yeah.
And if you think of when you're worried about something and you get caught into that overthinking stress vortex, how much energy are you actually putting on that when you're missing out on all of those things in life?
Yeah.
Your kids doing something cool, a bird singing in the background, you know, it's just, it takes up energy, and psychological stress can actually activate inflammatory pathways in the body that actually cause disease. We've seen this now. It's very, very well described, and I've actually got a diagram in my book that shows that. And that comes, 94% of it is stuff for the average person that doesn't come true.
It's so strange to think we would spend so much time, really 94% then of our mental energy, not in reality,
Exactly.
in complete fictional scenarios.
Yeah, and look, it's part of this human brain. But our brain is amazing. Like, we can have deep philosophical conversations about God, the universe, all of that stuff. We can have a conversation about metacognition, which is the fact that you can think about the fact that you can think about stuff, right? Think about that for a second. But this amazing brain of ours is a double-edged sword, because we are the only species whose thoughts can activate the stress response system. So that means that you can sit and ruminate about some bullshit that happened 20 years ago, or an argument that happened last week, or you can catastrophize about something that might happen, which 94% of the time doesn't, right? And you will create a stress response as if you're being chased by a lion. So that is the problem with our amazing brain, and our ability to want certainty, right? And that mixed in with thinking about bad things, it just becomes a disaster.
In the world of the Navy, I'm guessing you would have had to imagine worst case scenarios so that you could then be prepared for them and know what you were going to do if the worst thing happened.
Yes, for sure.
How do you translate that need to be prepared into a more healthy use of your mental energy and making sure you're not just activating stress responses unnecessarily?
Look, it's a great question, and the Stoics actually talked about this as well, about negative visualization. Is that you should wake up, Marcus Aurelius would do this, he'd wake up and think of some of the stuff that could happen and the bad people he would meet and what he would do about it, but that'd be it, right? So you do your scenario planning, right? And in the military, we always had a plan B, right? And because the old saying that we were taught when I went through officer training, no battle plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. right? And our enemy, if you like, if you use the analogy, is just the universe, right? It's just life. So you can have all of these great plans, and then something happens and it gets in the way. So you just know that, and you do a plan B, and you have that in your mind, and then you forget about it, right? So the whole idea that we talk about is that you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. But that's important. You plan for the worst, but you don't hope for the worst, and you don't think the worst is going to happen. You just be prepared for it, and then you hope for the best. And it's called, and particularly when you're going through stressful stuff, stuff that came out of the Hanoi Hilton prison camp when they interviewed all of these guys, was the key thing that helped people get through was realistic optimism. And they called it the Stockdale paradox after Jim Stockdale, who was their leader, which is that you need to simultaneously have a belief that you will prevail no matter what happens. But at the same time, you have a staunch acceptance of reality. So it's not about burying your head in the sand, right? And thinking, but it's Pollyanna, everything's going to be right.
Yeah.
If you're going through shit time, this is going to be hard, right? But I will get through this, right? And you know, with your family, with your team at work, this is going to be hard, but we will get through this if we band together, right? It's that realistic optimism that's hugely, hugely important. And the other thing that I can see right behind you is hope. So they are two real ingredients of highly resilient people, right? Is hope and realistic optimism.
Yeah, and having that collective of people to do all of this together with, right?
Yes.
What did you call it? The tap
code.
Yeah, the tap code.
So that came out of the Hanoi Hilton prison camp when some of these guys were in solitary confinement for 3.5 years. This was in the Vietnam War. And they created this tap code where they could tap on the walls and they could communicate with each other. And that was the thing that got them through. And I had the pleasure on my podcast to interview Lee Ellis, who spent 5.5 years in that prison camp. And he said that they risked their lives to communicate with each other because that was the glue that held them together. And psychologists who interviewed the survivors said that lifelong friendships were struck up in that prison camp between people who never even met each other face to face because they tapped on the walls and they helped each other through their darkest hours. And we need that. And the research shows when me and you have this tap code conversation, as I call it, a lot of Aussies know it as the "Are you okay?" conversation. Oxytocin and vasopressin are released in both of our brains. It doesn't matter whether you're helping me or I'm helping you out. Now, they are the hormones involved in love, trust, and social bonding, but they are also very potent anti-stress chemicals. So that's why it's important to have those relationships, right? And one of the key things is I say to people, if you've got your own stuff sorted, and even if you're not, even if you're struggling, it's look outwards rather than inwards. We're very self-focused. It's actually looking out and saying, who can I actually help? Who might be struggling? That is really key because that creates these bonds, and the human brain is a social organ.
And there's a balance between who are the people that you can help and who are the people that can help and support you. And more of this discussion, of course, is in your book, Death by Comfort. I've loved chatting with you about it. I want to know, as we wrap it up, Paul, for that person who is thinking, comfort is just so comfortable. Why would I want to give it up? Why would I, put myself in challenging situations? What would you say to us to not necessarily convince us, but at least invite us to embrace a bit of discomfort?
Yeah. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have any comfort, right? Our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they had comfort, but they balanced it out. There needs to be this balance between stress and recovery, right? So you have your little bits of comfort, but that has to go hand in hand with deliberate discomfort and going into the discomfort with the mindset of this is going to build my capacity and make me stronger. And the main reason is that the universe is going to throw you up a shit sandwich every now and then to deal with. And if you haven't trained your capacity to deal with stress, then you're going to be in trouble. So all of that stuff, the exercise, the heat exposure, the cold exposure, the deliberate psychological discomfort, combined with good recovery, good sleep, good nutrition, that will actually mean that you're at your maximum capacity to deal with the inevitable challenges of life. And the choice is yours because no one's coming to save you.
Yeah. Paul, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.